All free episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today.
Are we ready to
and we
start?
thank you in advance.
Good. Are you ready? Everybody is excited. Okay. Okay, I think we're getting ready to start here. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming. So this is our third installment in December of our Sunday evening Civil War lecture series. I just wanted to mention that last week I did Battle Babies, and it was the best program I ever gave. So I was very pleased with that. So the program I'm going to give here tonight is, you can see that I waffled on what the name should be: Debris of Battle, Debris of War. So it's some thoughts about the aftermath of the battle. And basically the theme of the program, in case you want to know what the theme is going to be, is that Gettysburg was devastated by the Battle of Gettysburg, but afterwards a brand new economic opportunity presented itself: tourism. And I think that the local people here were resilient in altering their economy to cater to the incoming visitors that wanted to see the battlefield. And so, I kind of called it Debris of Battle, but I started off calling it Debris of War, so I noticed I didn't change the name on my slide here. Okay. And then I have some thoughts as we go along. Of course, the Battle of Gettysburg lasted 3 days. It covered something like 20 square miles, something like 160,000 men and 70,000 animals occupied an area that was normally occupied by 3,000 people. So they basically ate all the food and consumed all the supplies in the area. And after the battle was over and both armies left, there were dead on the battlefield, and there were wounded that needed to be taken care of. Santa's got to go. I think I took him down last week. I don't know if you ever thought about what it might look like. Oh, I guess I should tell you that at the new Adams County Historical Society, when we open up, coming up here in April of 2023, we will have the museum open for school children, and we will give presentations to school groups on various topics, and one of them will be Debris of Battle. So in that program with the children, I'll probably have a trusted volunteer carry a cannonball around and have them hold the cannonball and show them what bullets look like, and talk about some of the artifacts in our collection that deal with this topic that we're going to discuss. So some of the slides in the slideshow I prepared for that. And, I wanted some illustrations of things that we don't normally have illustrations of. So here is an illustration from Frank Leslie's magazine, and it is visitors from Maryland. It's titled something like "Farmers from Maryland and Pennsylvania Descend Upon the Antietam Battlefield After the Fighting Was Over." And of course, my favorite thing is the vultures in the background of the view. Of course, we like to infer that there were large amounts of vultures on the battlefield after the fighting was over, and those vultures stayed on the battlefield. And I don't know about you, but when I was young, the tour guide told my group that they're the same vultures here now that were here at the time. And that's when I visited in the 70s. So I don't think anybody's telling that story today. But vultures do not live to be 120 years old. But altogether, there were 50,000 casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg. sometimes you hear 51,000 casualties. But since it's an estimate, I have no idea why somebody would pick 51 instead of 50 if we're estimating anyway. And you know, as a tour guide, the term casualty, I realize people don't seem to understand. 50,000 men were killed or wounded or captured or missing after the battle was over. And I don't know why that so many people don't know that figure or understand what casualty means. So many times I read in books. As a matter of fact, I was just watching a special about Ghosts of Gettysburg on YouTube this week. And in it, they said that there were 50,000 ghosts in and around the battlefield. So I guess because there were 50,000 men killed. So 50,000 men were not killed. 50,000 men were killed or wounded or captured or missing. How many men were killed in the battle? I guess that depends upon how you count. And we don't have very good figures. First of all, a lot of people, especially on the southern side, are reported as being missing after the battle's over. And there is no way to determine exactly how many of those missing were killed or how many of those missing later turned up to be, were captured, and, it's really difficult. And then, of course, we had that thing about, men are mortally wounded. If somebody dies a week after the battle, are they counted as being killed or are they counted as being wounded? How about 2 weeks? How about 3 weeks? And I think what I've determined is how it works is if when the commander of the unit of the regiment wrote the official report of the battle, maybe 2 weeks after the battle, in some cases, maybe a couple months after the battle, they put their casualty figures on that list. And that's the casualty figures that are generally accepted as killed, during the battle or mortally wounded. So we generally use the figure about 7,000 are on those lists. So about 7,000 men were killed or mortally wounded. Now, what I have noticed, if you died in a hospital in Gettysburg like 3 months after the battle, you're killed at the battle. But if you died in a hospital in Philadelphia or Harrisburg 2 weeks after the battle, you're probably not counted as being killed in the battle. So it's very complicated. That's why, again, it's easier just to use the figure 50,000. 50,000 men are killed or wounded or captured or missing after the battle, and it's hard to sort them out. Also wanted to mention that today, if you read about a modern battle, you only hear about how many men are killed. You never hear the figure about how many men were wounded or how many casualties there were. And that's especially true in Vietnam. So one of the things that startles me is when people start to compare, because you're comparing apples and oranges if you're talking about number of men killed versus number of men killed, wounded, captured, or missing. And I guess for me, the startling thing is I was on Little Round Top one day giving a tour, and I heard a school teacher giving a tour, and he told his group that more people were killed at the Battle of Gettysburg in 3 days than died during the entire Vietnam War. And of course, that kind of boggles my mind. Of course, Shelby Foote says more men died at the Battle of Shiloh than Waterloo. That's not even close to being true. So anyway, I just wanted to bring up that there's some discrepancy about that. And of course, it took about a week for the dead to be buried on the battlefield. We got a great letter from one of the New York newspapers, maybe the Herald or the Times, that mentions it's July 9th and are still dead laying in the rocks amongst Devil's Den. So it took about a week. And, I don't think a lot of people realize that all the soldiers were buried wherever they fell. In pits, in trenches, mostly the Northerners in individual graves, mostly the Southerners in mass graves. And it wasn't until months later that the Northern soldiers were reburied into the National Cemetery. And this is an image, of course, and this is the the expanded version of this image from an original copy that's held at the Gettysburg National Military Park of Samuel Weaver, who's on the right, with his burial crew that included Gettysburg African Americans reburying soldiers from Hanover, Pennsylvania, in a Reformed cemetery there, and putting them into caskets and then bringing them to Gettysburg for the Soldiers National Cemetery. And of course, Samuel Weaver, you can tell which one he is. He's got that really wild-looking beard, you know. I think that's pretty cool. I think if Hanover had a brochure, if you civil walking tour of Hanover, and I don't know why, but somebody thought that was a blur. They said that thing on Samuel Weaver's face is a blur in the original image. Now, that's a weird-looking beard that he had. Of course, also, you know that we do have a couple photographs by Samuel Fisher Corliss, Philadelphia, who recorded the reburials of soldiers into the National Cemetery. And we're not exactly sure when these photographs were taken, theoretically around the time of the Gettysburg Address. But soldiers, you know, were buried in the cemetery prior to the Gettysburg Address, and into 1864, they were still burying bodies. Now, it wouldn't be until 10 years later that ladies of the South would organize money. Well, it depends on how you count. I guess 7 or 8 years later, they started the process of reburying Southern soldiers from the battlefield into putting them into caskets and taking them to Southern cemeteries. And here's an image of a burial trench on Culp's Hill in 1867. And undoubtedly, there are Southerners buried in that particular trench at that time. And it was, I have his photo up there, J.W.C. O'Neill, a man born in Virginia, lived in Baltimore, Maryland for a while, actually moved to Hanover at the outbreak of the war in Gettysburg in 1863, who actually recorded the burial sites of many of the Southern soldiers after the battle in his journal. He was a doctor, his visiting book, and then later that was used to help gather Southern soldiers and reinter them in Southern cemeteries. Now, that was years after the battle. How in the world could they find all the Southern bodies after the battle? And I think it's obvious if you read, you know, the accounts of the newspaper as years go by, that they did not get all the bodies. You know, Kathy George attempted to do this, but of course there's inherent problems with trying to figure out if they got all the bodies or not, because we don't even really know exactly how many Southerners were killed at the battle. But if you add up how many we think were killed in the battle and should be buried on the battlefield, and how many were removed to Southern cemeteries years later, it seems as if there's a difference of about 1,000. So there are at least hundreds of Southerners that remain buried on the battlefield. And there could be as many as 1,000, depending on what kind of figures you accept and what kind of figures you use. But I would say there are hundreds. And our newspapers are filled with articles where people find skeletons when they least expect it in the years after the battle. And what's interesting is when they do find the skeletons after the battle, they usually dig them up and then rebury them at the same spot or near the corner of the field. It's not like they always reburied them in the cemetery or something. So there's still a bunch out there. Just the other day, of course, I was researching a new property. I found soldiers were discovered near the Almshouse Cemetery on the county farm, it said. So probably right behind where the new Historical Society is being built. They found, I think it was like 1906, they found some skeletons there. So, and of course, this is a picture of John S. Forney, who owned a farm on the first day's battlefield. And he probably has the most famous story, of course, about soldiers being buried on his property. It was Iverson's brigade that crossed his fields on July 1st, and it's hard, again, to determine how many men were killed and buried at that spot, because obviously a lot of men were wounded, taken to a hospital, and died in the hospitals behind the lines. But the best estimates, like 170 of them, remain buried in Forney's Field. And there's one really interesting mention of it in North Carolina Regiments by Walter Clark, in which he mentions that farmers, refused to plow that part of the field where those bodies were. Can you imagine, after the battle, plowing your field around Gettysburg? And this image is from Harper's Weekly magazine. Boy, I should have looked at the date. Off the top of my head, I think it's 1883. And the sketch artist came here and drew all kinds of different parts, things around the battlefield. And this is the thing he decided to add as one of the illustrations, a farmer plowing up a skull on the battlefield afterwards. So you can only imagine what it was like for the local people. Let me ask you this. If you know there are bodies buried in your field and you're the farmer, do you plow your field? You wouldn't believe how many visitors. I ask that sometimes on church, like, no, I wouldn't plow the field. You're the farmer. What are you going to do? Is somebody paying you not to plow your field? Yeah, and they did move them to the edge of their field when they found bodies in the field. Yeah. Okay. So obviously around Gettysburg there were wounded soldiers after the battle was over. And, again, we're estimating something like 20,000 wounded soldiers in and around the town after both armies marched away. And it would take a while for help to come. And so onus of caring for this massive amount of wounded was placed squarely on the shoulders of the people who lived here. We have, of course, the headquarters of the United States Sanitary Commission. We had the United States Christian Commission. They brought in supplies and wagons. But Gettysburg was the largest battle of the Civil War in terms of casualties, and it really put a strain on all the available resources that to care for the wounded soldiers. We have some really nice images of locals and women helping out at Camp Letterman General Hospital. This is a particularly clear image from the collection of William H. Tipton from it probably came from his, the people he started his apprenticeship with, the Tyson brothers, and it was obviously done in the late summer of 1863. I think I made a blow up of that. See, did you notice the soldier off to the right there? And then, people love to point out the ghost soldier there behind behind near the tent. Every time somebody moves in an old photograph, it's a ghost. Sally Myers, we're fortunate that she was one of the local nurses, and her son, who was born after the Civil War, became, the historian, and then for a while the president of the Adams County Historical Society. And he made sure that his mother's diaries and correspondence and papers relating to her activities after the battle made it to the archives of the Adams County Historical Society. Here I wanted to show you one of the things that we have from her collection is a Provost Marshal's Pass. See, August 2nd, 1863, issued to Sally Myers and her sister into the General Hospital until further orders. Isn't that kind of interesting? From the Provost Marshal of the Department of the Susquehanna. Of course, the Darius Couch, or is it Darius Couch? Did we ever solve that? I don't know. I like Darius Couch, but some people say Darius Couch. I wanted to show you also we have We have another one. The top one is from our collection for Peter Myers and family. That's Sally's dad. To the hospitals until further order. And you see it signed by Robert Bell. And this is August 28th. Robert Bell was the captain of the local Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry that eventually became Company C, 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry, and then was sent back to Gettysburg and worked as military guards in the hospitals after the battle. I'd imagine making sure that as the Southern wounded recovered, they didn't escape and to keep peace in the town. And then below it, there's another pass, and it's to Mrs. Myers and sisters to the Seminary General Hospital until further orders from September of 1863, signed by Robert Bell. And that bottom one is in the collection of David Malgi. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see that he actually got one of the passes from the family also at some point. So the Myers family stuff is wandering, floating around. Horses. One of the things that people find difficult to understand about the battle, and of course this is the Debria battle, is, okay, they buried all the dead and they brought the wounded to hospitals. It took, a week to bury the dead. They're trying to gather the wounded together. They're trying to care for the wounded. Their supplies are strained, and there's stuff everywhere on the battlefield. And one of the things that are out there are horses. What are they going to do? It's probably not until a couple weeks after the battle they even consider what they should do. And what are you going to do with, horses? And it's interesting also the estimates of how many dead horses there are on the battlefield. And just so you know, and boy, since Wayne's sitting right here, which one of us discovered the thing at the National Archives? Was it Jim Klaus or you? In the Quartermaster's records, there was a document, and it was from one of the officers in the Army of the Potomac, and he was saying in this document that to replace all the horses that had been lost in the Gettysburg campaign, they would need 2,500 horses. Do you remember that? I don't know if it was Ed or Jim.
It's probably Jim.
Jim. But it was there. And so people have taken that and said, oh, if the Union Army lost 2,500, well, the Southern Army lost 2,500, so 5,000 horses were killed. Now that is during the Gettysburg campaign. That means the march of the armies northward and the march of the armies after the battle. And you can bet that most of his horses died on the march to and from Gettysburg. And so the high figure you see is people say 5,000 horses killed in the battle. And that just can't be right. When you read the accounts of the people and you look at the horses that are shown on like the Elliott burial map, it's probably hundreds of horses that were killed in the battle. But still, if there's a few hundred horses, dead horses laying around the battlefield, you can imagine what that must be like. So again, I would say that realistically on the battlefield, the high number would be like 1,000 and the low number would be in the hundreds. But there are dead horses strewn across the battlefield. And what are you going to do with all the dead horses after the battle's over? And for a while, they did nothing. One of my favorite images is the Leicester House image. Of course, we have an account by Lydia Leicester talking about how a horse died under her tree and killed her best apple tree. But I wonder if I blew it up here. I might have blown it up a little bit. Yeah, look in front of her house. Okay, this photograph had to have been taken, we're guessing because it doesn't have a date on the image, on July 8th or July 9th at the earliest. So on July 8th or 9th, there's still a dead horse in the middle of the road. Can we get the dead horse out of the middle of the road? I think that's a statement about, I don't think the cameraman dragged a dead horse into the middle of the road for effect. But there's a horse just laying in the road like a week after the battle. And there's a great account where Benjamin French is at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery, and he visits the Leicester House in November of 1863, and sure enough, there's a dead horse on Leicester's property 4 months after the battle, just laying there. Did you ever have like a dead groundhog in your yard? I mean, what would that have been like? And of course, you know, I had to look hard for this. But do you know there is an illustration from one of those Civil War, reprinted sketchbooks after the war showing them burning horses. And of course, on every tour I give at the battlefield, I ask the kids on the tour, what would you do with the dead horses? And, you know, they think it's horrible that they burned the horses. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So also, I think when I do a program for kids and we try to make it more interactive, we have peppermint oil. And we have, I think, 3 accounts of it by the civilians that they were handing out peppermint oil, and you would wear a bottle on a chain around your neck and pour the peppermint oil on a rag, and people would walk around with a rag on their face to deaden their sense of smell, or to try to, you know. So you can only imagine how bad it was. Now, so getting to the meat of the program, George Arnold. George Arnold owned a store in the center of the town. And a couple weeks after the battle, I think it's on August 15th, it looks like, he wrote a letter that we have in our possession of the Adams County Historical Society to a member, William T. King, of the Adams County Cavalry. And he said, if you have not been over our battlefield, it is worth seeing. I consider it worth a trip across the Atlantic. Our town has now become immortalized, and we wish to make the enterprise as attractive as possible. And right away, George Arnold has this vision that Gettysburg is going to be a tourist attraction. And people are going to be coming here to see where the great battle was fought. And we need to be ready. So, and George Arnold's store, actually, he got one of his employees, a guy named Ditterline, to actually make a map of the battlefield and a little descriptive booklet of the battlefield, and it was prepared right away, and then visitors could go to a store and buy the souvenir booklet to go around the battlefield and accompany them on their journey. So he was very forward thinking in that respect. Of course, I should point out that in 1878, it was George Arnold who conceived the idea of the battlefield Prospect Tower, a large tower that you could, you know, here's one of the bonds that he sold to people to help him raise money to build the tower. And he charged people money to go in the tower. You paid a nickel, you could go to the top of the tower, which stood on East Cemetery Hill, and look out over the battlefield. And for 25 cents, you could attend a lecture with a knowledgeable guide that would point out features of the battlefield from the top of the tower.
And it's still only 25 cents.
Yeah, 25 cents. That's right. So, yeah. So I think it's kind of interesting. We have some examples of the bonds and certificates that George Arnold gave out. And he also included, if you bought one of the certificates, you got a free pass. Passes that you could hand out to friends. They could go up in the tower for free. Did you see that? So incidentally, that tower was there on East Cemetery Hill from 1878 until 1896, when it was torn down to make room for the statue of General Winfield Scott Hancock. I guess by that time, the tower was kind of in a state of disrepair. Now, of course, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and the dedication of the Soldiers National Cemetery was an example to everyone in the community that tourism was going to occur in our area. It was the first big tourist day. And, you know, I think it's interesting when you read about the ceremonies, the various estimates run from 15,000 to about 50,000. The Chicago Tribune, I think, says there's 50,000. But, you know, we generally say 15,000 when we're talking to visitors. When have you ever seen an example when asked to give an estimate, everyone gives the low figure? I always find that interesting instead of giving one of the crazy high figures. But there were thousands of people in town, and we ran out of rooms. People were sleeping on the floor in churches, in the school, in barns. Every private home had people staying in their home. I'm sure the Farnsworth House here had visitors during that Gettysburg Address week. Most of the visitors came in by train. And then, of course, as time went by, monuments were dedicated. This is General George Gordon Meade speaking at the dedication of the Soldiers National Memorial in 1869. Of course, the cornerstone was laid in 1865, and General Howard spoke. And then in 69, General Meade attended the ceremony, and they dedicated the monument. But over the years, obviously, thousands of monuments were dedicated. And just to give you just some food for thought, when each monument was dedicated, thousands of people came into our town for that monument dedication. And forget about the things like Pennsylvania Day, where they dedicate a whole bunch of them, and New York Day. But think about a monument being dedicated on the battlefield. And all the survivors of that regiment came into town to help dedicate that monument, and they brought their families. And since the regiments are all from the same town or the same county, you know, all the people from that area that had relatives that served in that unit came to that dedication ceremony. And you see these massive crowds of people coming into town for each of these ceremonies. And of course, these people need to have a place to stay. They generally come in by train. They have to eat, you know, and they want to buy souvenirs to take home with them to remember their visit by. And so, you know, there's an opportunity to here for the local people to make some money. I should also point out, here's a really nice photograph. You know, I meant to bring my list of who's in the photograph, but we, at the Adams County Historical Society, we have an excellent view or version of this image, and it tells you who was in the photograph. This is the Board of Directors of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. And I believe it's in 1887, or 1888. I have the date. I had to go into the newspaper and look around the time. I kind of knew the date because David Beeler is in the background in the painting, and he had just died. So I think it's 1888, but I found a list of the people who attended this ceremony. Most of the early members of the GBMA are locals. And John L. Schick, for instance, is off to the right. And let me see, who else can I? John Batchelder, of course, is on the left there with his you know, Longstreet-looking beard. I don't know why he looks so much like Longstreet. Above him in the back is William D. Holtzworth, you know, local battlefield tour guide extraordinaire, one of the early prominent battlefield tour guides. So early on, the effort to preserve the area where the battle was fought was led largely by local people. And a lot of it was David McConaughey, the visionary of what our battlefield would become. Of course, perhaps maybe they were doing it for the economic benefits of tourism and bringing tourists to Gettysburg, but they had the concept of preserving the area where the battle was fought and purchasing land, largely through donations and acts passed by the state legislature to provide funding for the effort, but it was locals. It wasn't until the late 1870s and into the 1880s where Union veterans start to take an interest also in the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. And eventually, the veterans will sort of take control of the organization, and it'll be more of a veterans organization. But that took some time. First, it was established by veterans. And of course, they wanted to preserve areas of the battlefield for a couple reasons. One of them was that, places like Culp's Hill, where you could go onto it and you could see the serious damage that was done during the fighting and still see the rifle pits. And it was a startling, tourist attraction, but also because they wanted to preserve the area while the tree still stood, because people were going out on the battlefield and cutting down trees with bullet holes in them and selling them. And I don't know if others in the group have been to GAR posts, but GAR posts all across Pennsylvania have a podium with a battle log with bullet holes in it that they use. I don't know, I know Wayne and I have both been to Pine Street in Philadelphia, where they had a Civil War museum. I guess it's moved now. Is that right, Wayne? It's moved, right?
They don't have it anymore.
Oh, they don't have it anymore. But when we went there, they had like 6 battle logs from Culp's Hill with bullet holes, with bullets in them. They were very popular one time. And also, local people were going out and cutting the trees up and selling pieces of wood with bullets in them. They were very, very collectible. And here is an image from Harper's Weekly. And again, I think this is out of the same issue off the top of my head that has, I think it's 1869. It's the issue where they're dedicating the Soldiers' National Monument. And you can see gathering the relics on the battlefield of Gettysburg. And you can see somebody is out there and they notice this and they draw a sketch of this. Locals cutting up in trees and selling pieces of trees with bullets in them. And here's a really neat image in the same issue where boys in the town are selling artifacts. You see the one kid holding up a cannonball and one's got like a bayonet, and they're selling in one of the hotels items to tourists. What's really interesting, you can see there's an advertisement in the background for Catalysins Springs water. So no doubt this is at the Springs Hotel, west of town. So imagine that it's after the Civil War and your farm has been devastated by the battle, and the federal government is not forthcoming providing money to damages to the local people because of the fighting that occurred on the farm. There's dead bodies on your farm, and the federal government is not coming to get the dead bodies from your farm. They're just on your battlefield. I always find that odd, that after the battle, if soldiers drop a musket on your property or a sword on your property, and you go out and pick up that sword off of your property, you'll be arrested by the provost marshal for stealing government property. But the soldiers that they killed and buried on your property are not their responsibility. That irritates me. Maybe it really doesn't irritate me that much. I guess if you dig a body up and then you take the stuff off the body, you're not stealing stuff. But anyway, that's a big issue in our newspaper. This is off topic, but just a big issue in our newspaper after the Civil War. The local people want the Southern bodies removed from the battlefield around Gettysburg, and it's not done. It's not until the ladies of the South attempt to recover Southern bodies that it's done. So that's fascinating. Okay. So, of course, at first, I guess, okay, so your farm is damaged, you're not getting any money, but your kids can go out on the battlefield and pick up stuff, and they can take it to the train station, and they can make money for your family by selling relics that they found on your farm to visitors coming in. And one of the things that is very popular with visitors is artillery shells. But no one is buying a live artillery shell from you. You must get the screw out of the fuse out of the top of it and empty the powder out and clean it out real well. And then a diffused artillery shell can be sold, right? So the kids around town are defusing the artillery shells and selling them. But it's very, very dangerous. And at first, it's probably not too difficult to unscrew the fuse from the iron shell. But as the weeks go by and these things weather, it is more difficult to get the fuse out. And one of the greatest examples of it is in September of 1863, where James Culp of Baltimore Street, who lives up in the building next to the courthouse, is banging an artillery shell against a rock on Cemetery Hill. And the shell explodes, and he's killed. And this is his burial permit from Evergreen Cemetery that we have in the collections of the Adams County Historical Society. And you can see he's almost 17 years old. I guess he's 16 years, 10 months, killed by the explosion of a shell. And you can visit his grave in Evergreen Cemetery. And there are not just one, but a few children around the town that are killed because of accidental explosions of ordnance, or, for instance, James Culp. No, I'm sorry, that's James Culp. For instance, Edward McPherson Woods is killed when his brother finds a musket on the battlefield and picks it up and shoots and kills. It's a 5-year-old killing a 3-year-old. So, and then in 1864, there was a boy in town who accidentally killed a little colored girl, they don't want to give her name, on Washington Street because of using a weapon he found on the battlefield. So, just like you hear about today in a third world country that still has landmines and children are killed by the ordnance, it happened on the fields of Gettysburg afterwards also, not as much. One of my favorite things are canes. And it is amazing to read the accounts of visitors. Canes made out of battlefield wood. Look at that. Did you ever see the picture with all the canes at Devil's Den? And on the left, Eric, you might recognize that. That's a little boy. And I think like in the carriage behind him is it Rutherford B. Hayes or Grover Cleveland? Taft, William Taft. But you can see the kids with canes in that image. So they carve canes and they sell them to visitors. And some of them are very, the detail in the canes are really interesting. They carve little mini balls on the canes, or the portrait of Jenny Wade. I should have put a Jenny Wade cane in the slideshow. I don't think I did. But canes are big sellers. Let's see, I don't think I have another. So I wanted to mention, what time is it? Okay, it's time for our break before we get into some personalities that are going to profit from the battlefield. I have our gift certificates. So we have a big crowd today. Your chances of winning were a lot greater last week. Right? Okay, let's see. Everybody who came last week won, every single person. Okay, for the first gift certificate, we have 3 of them. The last 3 numbers are 5, 4, 8. Jim? He wasn't very loud about it. Did you win last week too?
No, I did not.
Okay. Okay.
One of the 3 people here.
You were one of the people that did not win. Okay, let me pick a different one. I'm not looking? Okay. Boy, my eyes are bad. 580. Okay. Good. Did you win the first week? No? Good.
Thank you.
Good. We like it when different people win. Okay, one more ticket. Okay. 537. Okay, very good. Wendy. Okay, so we're going to take about 5 minutes. So if you'd like to, you can go up and get another drink. I know you'll probably need another drink before the next part of the program. Very good. Okay. On my back. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a few people that are very enterprising in the collection of artifacts and relics from the battlefield that maybe you've heard of, that maybe and you'll have to excuse me, it's been a while since I talked about any of these people in any depth, so hopefully I'll remember things. But this is Joel Albertus Danner. And Albertus is his middle name, and his nickname is Bert. So oftentimes you see him listed in newspaper articles, if you ever come across him, as Bert Danner. He is the son of Joel Danner, Joel Buchanan Danner, who lived in the center of the square, the Danner House. And you might not know Joel Danner. Of course, he was a business partner with David Ziegler. So Danner and Ziegler, they were in the carriage making business together. And of course, Ziegler owned Ziegler's Grove, lived on Baltimore Street, and Joel Danner lived in the center square. So Bert Danner here, I think he was 17 at the time of the battle. So he's, just coming into manhood. And when he dies, his obituary, I think, is kind of interesting. J.A. Danner, as the proprietor, the Danner's Museum had a national reputation. As a boy at the time of the battle, he grasped the significance of the value of all relics of the battle, and in those days began the gathering of them and became the most, wow, I don't even know if I can read that, indefeatable, whatever. Okay. Collector of relics of the battle. Scarce a day passed that some boy or person did not bring to his place relics which he purchased. So not only did he himself find stuff, he set up a business and he bought and sold relics from the battlefield and had a team of kids going out and finding stuff that you might think is discarded debris of the battle that he could sell in his store. Another part of his obituary, he first opened and carried on a relic business in his father's store. Now, his father's store was the Danner and Ziegler store, so it would be on the first block of Baltimore Street on the west side, just north of the Fahnestock. It was a little north of the Fahnestock house. And it says here that the store was lined with his collection. After his father's death and subsequent sale of the store building, he moved into the McLean Room, afterwards owned by Brannaman. I don't know exactly where that is. It could be talking about William McLean across the street or Moses McLean near the square. He remained there but 1 year, removing in 1876 to a small room across the alley from the store building of his father. And that is basically right next to the Fahnestock house. Do you know, if you go up Baltimore Street, you walk past the Fahnestock house, you come to a little alley, and there's always like I don't want to pick on little old ladies. Little old ladies smoking. Yeah, that's what I was getting. Wayne said it too. Little old ladies are smoking. Jim sits and smokes with them? Okay. Okay.
What they do, they're always out there smoking.
They are. And one of them has a little dog, and a little dog's always there.
You guys seem to know an awful lot about this.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to show you a picture of this in a moment.
Nothing else to do with it.
And it says that it's right along the dwelling of H.J. Fahnestock, meaning the Fahnestock store. Here, he held forth until 1892, when he removed to his present location. And, of course, this is his obituary, off the top of my head, in like 1906, maybe 1904. I forget. So here is a photograph from February 22nd, 1892. And we are looking, this is George Washington's birthday, and it's a group of people gathered in front of the Fahnestock house, and Joel Danner is standing in the doorway of his store. And all these guys in the photograph are identified, and we have the identification of the people in the photograph on a little, it's a large mounted photograph with all their names indicated. And one of the things I really like is you see the crippled man with the unusual looking wheelchair bicycle apparatus. That's Maurice Fox, whose name is carved into the rocks of Devil's Den in many early photographs. But do you see the sign back there on the little lean-to store against the Fahnestock house, Joel Danner's Relic Museum? So there's an illustration of where his museum was. And then, I blew it up. There you go. You know what's interesting about this image? That hanging on the wall back there, and I'm sure this was inside the museum, and it's moved outside just for this photograph, is the painting of the Gettysburg Guards marching through the town of Gettysburg in 1833. And, of course, it shows the Fahnestock house on that side of the block. That painting is on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. So that's interesting. And that was obviously, it's on the front cover of William Frascinato's book, the Gettysburg Bicentennial Album. Here is a photograph that was taken, I think it's dated in one of the newspaper articles, I think to like 1899, and it's Bert Danner, and he's standing on Baltimore Street, so we're kind of back where the camera is at the Fahnestock house, looking north along that side of Baltimore Street, and he's in front of a pump. And the caption of the image is, "This is the pump where Juba Early watered his horse while he was writing the requisition for supplies on June 26, 1863. Of course, we know that that's not really the pump, that the pump was up, the next pump up near the square in front of the McLean house, but that's all right. And you might see on the pump, it's actually the requisition for supplies hanging on the pump. That there's a picture of Meade and Lee, and in between it is a little note that Juba Early wrote, and below it is Kendall Hart's reply by the Gettysburg Town Council. And you might not know it, but that was kept by the Kendall Hart family. It was on display at the Danner Museum, and that will be on display at the Adams County Historical Society when we open up here in the spring of 2023. So there's, if you didn't know it, there is Bert Danner in that image. Let's see. Here is an image, and I didn't look at it carefully to see which one Danner is in the image here. I should have looked. But this is when his shop moved in 1892 across the street. And this basically is what is known today as the Apple Building. Ping's Restaurant. Oh, it's not Ping's Restaurant anymore. It's not even. It just went out of business. I don't even know what it is now. Okay, it's on the left there. And then on the right of this building would be the one on the corner. boy, you know, I don't even know what that is anymore. It was the, it's a wine tasting place, yes. Good, you guys know. But it's on the, that building, I think, was torn down after Danner died. And this building was the one that was here at the time of the battle. And if you look up on the second floor of the building, you see there's a photographic studio there at the time of this image. So I think Snyder and Pensel had a gallery there for a while. Mumper had a gallery there for a while. So various businesses rented. The Fonestocks owned that building also, and they rented it out. Generally, the bottom floor is rented by one party and the upstairs rented by another party. But you can see the Danner Museum was there for a time. Also, let's see if I can, oh yeah, this guy right here, next to the dog, that's Charles Tyson Tipton as a young man. I have lots of photographs of him, so I know who that is. Now, the identities of the people in this, I don't have, besides just a few of them I recognize. So we have some images from the inside of his museum. Whether the images are from the inside of his museum when it is on, you know, the Fonestock side of the street or across the street, I don't know. But here is a famous photograph of a collection of items that were donated to, or sold, I shouldn't say donated, they were sold to the Pennsylvania State Museum. And you probably know that there on the left is leaning up, I didn't blow it up, is John Burns musket. And so that's the one that's on display at the Pennsylvania State Museum today. And the Pennsylvania State Museum owns all the stuff in this image. And the artillery shells that were part of the Danner collection are interesting in the fact that he painted numbers on them in each case, and there is a description of what is in each case, I guess, attached to the wall beside each case. So you can see what's in each case. And here are two more images. One's from the collection of the Adams County Historical Society. The other one's from Sue Boardman. I'd imagine, Eric, you probably have images from the Danner collection too, of shelves that were in his museum. So I just think it's spectacular. And you can actually see some of the items that are on display. On the bottom, the image on the left, on the very bottom, if I'm not mistaken, that particular display case, I think, is the one that's on display at the GAR Hall in the basement. I don't know if it's still out in the basement in the case. But the shells have numbers on them. Now, here's one thing I learned early on, and I bet you Eric probably runs across this more than anybody else here, is that, okay, I don't know how many cases are in this museum. Well, let's say there's 5 cases. There's probably like 10. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, there's 5 cases. And each case, there are shells in it and they're numbered. So there are 5 number 1s and 5 number 2s and 5 number 3s and 5 number 4s. So what happens is people find a shell with a number on it, and then they look at the picture, and it doesn't look like the shell with the same number on it in the photograph, because it's not from that case, it's from a different case. I don't know if Eric has done it. I have never seen one of the shells with a number on it and then was able to go to the photograph and say, there's that same shell. It never happens. So maybe he had like 10 shelves of...
He rotated quite often.
But he rotated quite, and the numbers are different on them. But collectors, these shells with these painted numbers on them, and I should say, blocks of wood below them that tell you where they were found, are amongst Gettysburg Relic Collectors' most collectible items. And so just this last, I guess 2 weeks ago, I got this email from the 5th Maine Regimental Museum. Do you know the veterans of the 5th Maine Infantry that were part of the 6th Army Corps at Gettysburg after the war built a veterans home retreat, would you call it, on Peaks Island outside of Portland, Maine? And the the curators, a couple of them, started emailing with me. They found a trunk that apparently hadn't been opened since the 50s. And in it, they found a collection of shells, and they wanted to know if I knew anything about them. And you can see that they were sold to them by Danner. And of course, I looked at all the photographs I had, and they didn't match any of the ones in any of the photographs. But there's no doubt that they came. I mean, this is not something that was created recently. These things, here's I wanted to show you the examples of the base of the shells. Do you see how they have written on there where they come from, and they have the numbers painted on them? So on one of the shells. It's just fascinating to me. Now, I should also mention that I don't know if anybody wants to get into collecting these kinds of things. They're very collectible. They're very expensive. But I don't know how much I trust artillery shells with painted numbers on them. Let me ask it this way, Eric. Have you seen fakes?
Yeah.
So I don't know. But again, how can you tell unless you find one in the photograph? But Danner Museum items are out there, and you can buy them if you so desire. Another person that created collectibles, extraordinary collectibles, was a guy named John Abraham Good. He's born in 1859. I really wanted to be middle name after Abraham Lincoln. But according to his tombstone, he's born in 1859. Now, I thought at first that he was born during the presidential election of Abraham Lincoln. I think it's November 2nd. So maybe it's 1860 and his tombstone's just wrong. Let's just say it that way. But John Abraham Good. He's born in York County. He's not from Gettysburg, but at some point after the war, he moved to Gettysburg, and he sold relics. Now, this is an image. It's not the best, but it's off of an advertisement from around 1900, and it shows him with his portable relic cart. So he would actually have a cart pulled by horses, and he would drive out to your dedication ceremony and set up and sell you relics out of his, rolling cart. And he made relic displays. Sometimes they're called desk sets. Sometimes they're called relic boards. And he would sell them as quickly as he could make them. And he is well known for this in these early circles. And, here's some examples of things that have been said to be part of John Good's. Now, one of the things we might have an issue with over years is there's a lot of other people working in the relic business around town, and some of these things might be attributed to him that are part of maybe some employees that used to work for him and doing it on their own. But he took relics, basically put nails through them and nailed them to a board and was selling them to tourists. And some of his stuff is just very elaborate. So here you go. So I did this for Eric. The relic board on the right with the Culp's Hill musket is just extraordinary, and that's on display at Eric Doerr's Gettysburg Museum of History. So if you're interested in seeing up close some of the things that we're talking about in our program, you can see them in his museum, which is, this time of year, I guess you're open on weekends, right? You can stop by. Okay. The one on the left is a John Good relic board, and it's from the Gettysburg National Military Park. So they have a few relic boards that he made. And I just want to show you, that's Andrew's hand in the photograph. These things are enormous. Like the one on the left, you can see a full musket found on the battlefield in one of these display cases. So, and this is also, I got this from a photograph you put on Facebook, Eric, and this is an advertisement for John Good, proprietor of the Gettysburg Battlefield Novelty Works. And according to this business card, early on, He's at 30 North Washington Street near the Pennsylvania Railroad Depot. So this is obviously after the depot was put in there in 1884. So somewhere on North Washington Street there, and that's where he lived. Now, also, John Good, not only did he sell relic boards and relic sets, what he also did was he set up a lathe and he took battlefield wood and he made it into items that he sold, which I think is fascinating. And you can see that in this advertisement, he's on West Middle Street. And again, we have the Gettysburg Battlefield Novelty Works. And you can see that they're talking about the Novelty Works. And I think, there you go. These are at the Adams County Historical Society, and you can see on the bottom where they're turned on a lathe, and you can see that what you can see is written on the cups are like Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, Devil's Den. So he made these cups out of battlefield wood. Isn't that crazy? And then I wanted to give you this advertisement. I forget. Oh, this is from 1906 in the Gettysburg Compiler. John Good has a relic and souvenir factory, which if you haven't seen it, you should. John makes relics, and they are all genuine. He makes wooden pistols, paper knives, statuettes, jewelry boxes, and this and that knick-knack. And he sells them to tourists when they come on their excursions. Now, wouldn't it be really cool if I found a photograph of his relic factory hidden in the collections of the Adams County Historical Society that I never knew about? I couldn't believe it when I found this. And, you know how big our collection is of stuff. And I don't know what box I found this in.
You know where it was?
Good question. I worked on that for a long time. So I'm glad you're going to appreciate this. Yes, I do. So I knew it was advertised on West Middle Street. It was at the corner of West Middle Street, and I believe that is Howard. Do you see the stream and the railroad track on the Fairfield Road, West Middle Street? It's set basically at the base of Seminary Ridge on West Middle Street. It's right there. And I have another photograph that shows it also, so I know it's there. I can't find an address anywhere in the paper for it because he went out of business before they got addresses. But see, if you see where the stream goes under West Middle Street there, that's where the bicycle crossing path is. And also, just to the right of the stream is where Kadori's monument is located now. You see? But this is the 1888 bird's eye view of Gettysburg. So there you go. It took me a long time to figure that out. I was baffled for a while because it's such an intense building. Also, you know what's kind of interesting? Look, and I think I'm guessing that might be John Good on the carriage there. The photograph is greatly damaged, but you see what he's got? He's got chairs. So I'm like, okay, he's got a lathe, so he makes rocking chairs and he sells rocking chairs. So I found this in the newspaper. What should we call our rocking chairs we're trying to sell to the general public? The Gettysburg chair. Good. So I'd be interested in anybody out there has a Gettysburg chair. So do you see how they're made it to Gettysburg Novelty Works? This advertisement's actually from a Shippensburg newspaper. The thing about his chairs, he didn't advertise them here. You don't advertise Gettysburg chairs in Gettysburg. No, he advertises in other newspapers. You can buy your, chairs manufactured at the Gettysburg Novelty Works. So I think John Good again, is one of the more enterprising relic dealers in the post-war era. And then there's Edward Woodward, who I think, for my money, and again, I'm not going to buy these. Don't worry, I'm not buying any of these relic sets. But I'm saying I think Edward Woodward is the most artistic of the relic display makers. Edward Woodward, and I guess about 5 years ago, I met his great-great-granddaughter. Occasionally now she comes to Gettysburg, stops by the Historical Society, and asks questions about if we know anything more about him, or what's the latest thing found. She's probably stopped by your museum a few times, no? Or maybe she hasn't said anything. But she's just into her genealogy, and this guy is from England. He lived in Baltimore, and he came to Gettysburg sometime after the battle. And I say sometime after the battle, I found him in the 1863 Septennial Census, which was a list of Gettysburg taxpayers from October of 1863. So he's in Gettysburg within a few months of the battle.
He came with the Christian Commission or the Sanitary Commission. I got some.
Oh, you heard about him?
Yeah.
Wayne says he came with the Christian Commission or Sanitary Commission. So he's in Gettysburg, and he was a gun manufacturer. He also has a son named Edward Woodward. So some of the artifacts, display cases might be made from his son. But he's making these things early on. And he adds a detail to his artifacts that's kind of interesting, is that he actually carves Gettysburg into the artifact, usually on a piece of artillery shell. This is one from the collections of the Adams County Historical Society. And they always have this design on the front of them, so you can kind of tell. And I don't know if you can tell here, but here it says round top on this. And then it says Gettysburg etched into a piece of canister, 1863. So he's a gun maker, and he was etching and being very creative. Now, this is one that I just happened to get off of one of the auction sites on the internet. I don't think I got this from any particular local place. But here's something. Here's the one at the Adams County Historical Society, and look at the one at the top. He has like a formula. He's not just attaching relics to a board. He's mass producing these things, and he's being very creative, and they basically mimic each other. Battlefield wood, an eagle he found somewhere, a piece of canister, a piece of shell. What is the piece of marble, do you think?
From the cemetery.
Do you think it's like a piece of broken tombstone from Evergreen Cemetery?
Or molded from melted down fuses.
Oh, so he made the eagles. I was going to say, where's he getting all the eagles from the battle? Oh. That's why the eagles are the same, not because, I get it. Excellent. And, there are people that collect these things. And I don't know, for the guides, Tom Winfrey, he has a huge collection of these. Do you happen to know how many he says he has?
I don't know. It changes all the time, but he has a lot.
He has a lot of them.
Like 30 or 40 or something.
Wow. So, Eric, since we have you, I'm sorry to lean on you. How much do these things sell for now?
Depends on how big they are, and some of them are rarer than others because some of them are engraved with like Valley of Death or Devil's Den or something. So I would say on the low end 1,500, on the high end 3,500, depending on how big and how rare it is.
Excellent. And if you want to, you can get on the internet, you can Google them, and you can find pictures of them, and occasionally you can find one being sold on eBay or at one of the high-end auction houses. But again, The Woodwards, you can tell because he puts that grate on the front of them, on the relic displays, and engraves the relic, you know. And again, I guess it's his, from his gun background.
Yeah, Tim, that's a match striker, and that's a match holder.
Oh.
That one.
I did not pick that up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Don't have the match striker.
Is that why you think that they all have a little thing you can, they don't all hold matches, but that's fascinating. Very good. And then I have some stuff, interestingly enough, we have stuff from another local furniture maker who dabbled in relics, Charles Comfort. And someone here might live in his house. So here is some of his, I got a couple of his relic displays that he made. And you can see here's a piece of wood. What you need to do is you need to take the piece of wood from Culp Sale and you have to, make something neat out of it. You can't just have a piece of wood with an, bullet in it. So there are a couple of Culp Sale bullets. One of my favorite people is a guy named Speece. And is it let's see that right? Yeah, Charles Speece. He had a pottery works. And his pottery works was at the Lutheran Theological Seminary on Seminary Ridge. And it's basically where the dorms are now. So it was down Springs Avenue near the YWCA is where he had his pottery works. He eventually sold his pottery works to the Pfaltzgrafs. And they started making dinnerware. And of course now I think their factory is in West York. One of their factories, if you heard of Pfaltzgraf. But he made battlefield miniature souvenirs, something that could be sold very cheaply. And of course, you see on my advertisement, he made a little miniature Jenny Wade canteen. You got to have that. And of course, a General Meade canteen. There was no General Sickles canteen. But I like the little jug. Isn't the jug nice? And this monument, there are monuments. He recreated the monuments of the battlefield in miniature and was selling them early on. Isn't that fascinating? And this is actually pottery painted silver. I don't know if you can see where it wears away. But, I mean, come on. Of all the monuments on the battlefield, did you do the 6th Ohio Cavalry? Come on. I bet they don't know what avenue is that on. Oh, you guys, well, the guys knew. Pleasanton, yeah. Yeah. That's one of, and we won't tell the joke, that's one of Charlie Fennell's jokes, right? On his tours. Yeah. Sherfy. Now, I just wanted to mention that there's some other people that have taken advantage of tourists over the years. Now, selling artifacts to tourists and relics, the visitor wants to buy something tangible to take home from their visit to Gettysburg. Joseph Sherfy doubled the size of his peach orchard shortly after the battle. John Batchelder actually complains about this in his book, Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It, kind of warns about Sherfy selling peaches from the 1863 peach orchard that he jarred at the time, suggesting that, Sherfy is always creating new peaches. And, of course, here's the cherry trees along the side of the Sherfy house where one of the cherry trees has an artillery shell sticking out of it, and Sherfy had a stand. He would invite you over to look at, the cannonball sticking out of the cherry tree and then, sell you some peaches from the battle. I think that some of the other collectible items that are kind of interesting are the spoons. And, jewelry stores catered to the tourist industry. On the left there we have Blocker. And on the right, Penrose Myers. Penrose Myers was a jeweler, started his jewelry business in 1876. He was a little boy during the battle. I think he was born in 1859. And his father was William Myers, where Kemper's Brigade Hospital was in the mill, Bream's Mill, at the time of the battle. So he grew up in a house in a mill that was used as a hospital during the fighting. He ended up marrying a Ginny Tate, who was the daughter of Theodore Tate at the Eagle Hotel. And on Baltimore Street, they had this jewelry store. But he became really big into souvenirs, and eventually he was one of the largest distributors of postcards of the battlefield. And here's an image of his Penrose Myers in front of his jewelry store with some of his souvenirs and his postcards shown on the up along the wall. I think off the top of my head that this is where Dirty Billy's Hats is. I think it's I think that's right. 21 Baltimore Street. And then, of course, later, Penrose Myers, he bought a house on Oak Ridge near the Doubleday Inn, not the Doubleday Inn, but the one down a little bit from it. And every day until he died in the 1940s, I think, he walked over to a souvenir stand that he established on Oak Ridge, just on the other side of the wall near the tower. And there's images of Penrose Myers' souvenir stand. And then it continued to be run after his death by his daughter for a while. And some people tell me it stood until like 1960 up there on Seminary Ridge. You can see lots of images of that. Oh, this got out of order. How did this get out of order? I was going to say that in 1938, and I put this in here, this is Mrs. Charles H. Peffer, granddaughter of the Reverend and Mrs. Sherfy in 1938, showing a jar of peaches that contained peaches from the battle. And of course, what's interesting about this, sure, that's Sherfy's granddaughter, but she married, let's see, how would that be, your great-great-uncle? It's Eric's great-great-uncle that she married. Now, there were other enterprises in Gettysburg. We have the Gettysburg Springs Hotel. You know, people built hotels to take advantage of the vast amount of tourism. And this is one of the this is one of the first really extensive tourist enterprises that was conducted in Gettysburg. It opened in 1869, where the Gettysburg Country Club was for many years on the other side of Willoughby's Run. And it was a huge tourist attraction. Of course, there was a spring there where you could take a bath, or drink from the medicinal, I guess they didn't, for a time they only had baths, but you could drink medicinal water from the spring. Here's General Meade drinking medicinal water from the Catalysine Springs. The water had healing powers. Yeah. Yeah. We know one of the stories told by J.W.C. O'Neill was that wounded from the battle, from the Iron Brigade, crawled over to the spring to bathe their wound, and they started to become healed. And they realized the significance of the water, and then they started medicinal springs there. So, and then, it's interesting that, we have the Battlefield Hotel, the Wagon Hotel that's set up just up the street here became known as the Battlefield Hotel. Again, a decided change of name to take advantage of tourists. And then, of course, we have locals that are enterprising enough to realize that people need to be taken around the battlefield and shown important things on the battlefield and what happened. And many of the early tour guides were veterans of the Civil War. So I always love this image from Harper's Weekly magazine of the veteran, giving a tour. And William D. Holtzworth, we mentioned earlier, is a local who was in the Union Army during the battle, not here at Gettysburg, but at Winchester, and gave tours of the battlefield afterwards, became one of the greatest lecturers of his time. And here's a business card of Charles Gilbert, battlefield tour guide, and he was a member of Company K. So here's a local Gettysburg guy that fought in the battle. And he can always be found at the Keystone Hotel on Chambersburg Street, which would be like where the James Geddes is called the Union Hotel now. It's being refurbished at the moment, the front of it. But isn't that interesting? This is his business card, owned by Sue Boardman, I should mention. She let me use it there. J.W. Sefton, guide and lecturer, an eyewitness to the Battle of Gettysburg. So, in other words, he was a young boy at the time of the battle, and he was hiding in his basement. There's a great article in the New York Times in 1888 called "Never Mind the Guide." And it's a really negative article about battlefield tour guides and how they were hiding in their basement during the battle, and then afterwards, they go out, and anything they can find of value, they drag into their basement, and then they'll sell it to visitors, and then when you come, they take you around the battlefield in the carriage and charge you a lot of money. It's a really, really good article. So if you get a chance, Never Mind the Guide. I think I reprinted it in our Battlefield Dispatch years ago. Okay. Here's William H. Tipton. Only a few more things I wanted to talk about. William H. Tipton, of course, takes advantage of tourists in a way because he sells photographs to them. And again, visitors that come into Gettysburg, they want their photograph taken, so he's there to take your photograph. What I think is really neat is William Tipton would go out when a monument was erected, and as they put up the monument, he would take photographs of it, and then it would cover up the monument. He'd go back to his studio, and a couple weeks later, there would be a monument dedication where all the veterans would gather around the monuments. They would have the unveiling of the monument, and they would all be oohing and eyeing, and in the background, William Tipton would be like, "Photographs of the new monument." And he would sell photographs of the monument at the monument dedication. And then he would have all the veterans line up in front of the monument, take their picture, and then sell them that picture too. He was really good at what he did. And we have, here's tourists would get their pictures in front of the Devil's Den. I estimate from reading, or looking at all the different photographic companies that were active between 1884 and 1930 and the negative numbers on their images, there are somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 images of tourists taken in front of Devil's Den during those years, depending on how you count. Oh, I should mention that on our, not on the left, but here is the first black battlefield tour guide, born in Maryland, born in Liberty, Maryland, possibly born a slave. William Francis Penn was his name. Married one of Basil Bigg's daughters, lived on the Tawnytown Road, moved here after the war, like in the 1870s, gave tours of the battlefield. Of course, there was amusement parks on the battlefield starting in the 1880s, and here's images taken at William Tipton's gallery at Round Top Park. I should have put it in here, Wayne. I think I have a picture of Wayne staying at this location. I didn't put it in, no. Round Top Park. So, early on we had amusement parks. And again, the visitors need to have a place to unwind and need a place to eat. So we'll feed them and we'll, take their money. Here's Round Top Restaurant run by the Rosensteel family. They also ran a relic museum there. And this is at the intersection of the Wheatfield Road and Little Round Top. You can see the Round Top Restaurant sign there. The Rosensteels also, as time went by, of course, they built the new museum up here on Cemetery Hill that would eventually become the National Park Service Museum, the basis for their museum. And a lot of the Rosensteel collection is with the National Park Service. But that building was torn down in the 1980s. I remember when that building stood. little round top hall and dancing floor. So eventually they had a big open space in there when they moved the museum, and they had dances there, and then they turned it into a roller skating rink for a while. So you could roller skate there. Look at the bottom. Trolley cars direct to place. So the trolley dumped people off in front of their museum on Little Round Top. And look, of course, they sold cigars, tobacco, ice cream, lemonade. That's all you need. And, of course, the electric trolley ran around the battlefield. It's interesting today, when we talk about the trolley, running visitors around the battlefield from 1893 to 1916, and how controversial that was at the time. And you can see it cost 10 cents to run around the battlefield all day on the trolley, get a pass. 25 cents if you'd like to ride with the tour guide in the trolley car around the battlefield. Got to have a tour guide on it. And, we have a route on the back of the card that you would get to pass. They would have the route of the trolley and the stops and where it went around the battlefield. Later, I mentioned this on several of my lectures last year, and on my lecture I gave outside, if anybody was there just this past November. Was that early December? I don't remember when it was. November. We had an airplane tour of the battlefield. You actually took off from the fields of the Forney Farm and rode down Seminary Ridge and around Devil's Den and Little Round Top and up Cemetery Ridge and came back. So it cost $3, and there were these lovely ladies that would take you in the airplane ride around the battlefield. It was there from 1927 until 1940. Airplane ride. Who would ride an airplane around the battlefield? Who would go up in a giant balloon, 250 feet in the air, just for 5 minutes and then come back down? So I'm curious, because I was only there for like a year. How many of us went in the hot air balloon?
Back there.
Wow. Nobody else? I thought you guys didn't go in it?
We hired somebody to do it. We're afraid. You think we can go up in that?
So in their book on Pickett's Charge, it's, you have it with you there in case somebody wants to see it. They have a photograph of the fields of Pickett's Charge from the hot air balloon.
Yeah.
I thought you guys took it.
No, we paid somebody to do it. We're not crazy enough to do that.
Was it scary? What I didn't like is the balloon wasn't allowed to go in the air if it was over 5 miles an hour winds or something like that. I was like, why? Okay, I don't know why I did it. I did it. Okay, did you remember we had a helicopter tour of the battlefield? You did the helicopter tour? It was run by Mr. Voss, who had ag rotors. So his full-time job was a helicopter that spread fertilizer on farm fields. And in the summer, he did a helicopter tour of the battlefield. The Park Service put their foot down about this. So I saw it a few times in the 70s, and he would fly right by the front of Little Round Top on his helicopter. And I'm pretty sure because of this, there's a 500 feet airspace limit above that you're not allowed to fly. And I'm sure you're not allowed to have a drone over the battlefield. Or at least you're not allowed to fly it from the battlefield. You can stand off and fly over, right?
Right.
And then, of course, I always think of, what we shouldn't make fun of some of these things, because, look, we have a double-decker tour bus. And we as guides ride on the double-decker tour bus and narrate sometimes. But, it is really difficult to say what is a proper taking advantage of the tourist and what is too much. So I think we all have to think about it and decide, we all do it consciously and unconsciously, what should be allowed to happen and what should not allowed to be happen. And, there's really no line. Like, if you ask me, I don't think there should be ghost tours. But that's just me. So, we had the tower, the 300-foot tower. What was the purpose of the tower? Was it an education in the sky, or a classroom in the sky, or was it somebody trying to gouge the public and make money? And then, I always just like to. I just love this advertisement that Friendly's put out when they moved in. This is an early 1980s advertisement, and I think there's a lot that says a lot. So anyway, I would just like. I guess my point at the end here is that. We have to think when we look back about this, when we read these articles where people are picking on locals for being battlefield tour guides, or picking on locals because they're running up to you and trying to sell you a battlefield cane, just like when you go to, the Bahamas and somebody runs up to you and is trying to sell you something that, we have to step back and look at it and, and think about the fact that this is a commercial enterprise in that respect. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and listening to my program. I hope each person learned just a little bit of something that you didn't really want to know. Okay, well, I'll be around for a while if anybody has any questions. Thank you. No. I'm always amazed by different things.